View, and let me just make sure. Yep, you're on speaker view. All right, so we're gonna just start now, and he can introduce himself a little bit more. So just enjoy the presentation, guys.
All right, well, welcome. Glad to be here. Hopefully, you can see me up there. Um, I'm coming to you from Boulder, Colorado. A beautiful little place in the mountain here. Set my timer so I don't talk too long. And where one of the subjects of this brief discussion has been legalized for about 7 years, and has an industry that's doing well. I wouldn't necessarily say thriving, but doing well. And the consciousness shift has begun to happen, as I had and many people had assumed years ago, when legalization was on the table or in people's minds, a bit away from cannabis being solely a escape or recreational endeavor, but also for the relationship with cannabis, which is an ecology, a relationship with the planet, for that to be connected to spirit or spirituality, and higher consciousness, and connected to medicine, and actualized as that. So I guess I've dove right in here, but I guess I can give a brief. My background is in history, Master's of Religious Studies, and I'm currently a PhD student in East and Western psychology, focusing actually on masculinity from a Black psychological, methodological perspective. My relationship with cannabis stems a lot from the other aspect of my being, which is probably more important to me, that I am a father, single father I happen to be, but I'm a father of four. And my relationship with cannabis as a recreational, everyday recreational experience began when I found out about my first daughter being on the way, my ex-wife being pregnant. So at that age, being a teenager essentially, my relationship with cannabis began as escapism to a certain extent, but also as a way to help pacify, to be able to slow down the mind, and support presence, being present, both, both. Um, so my life quickly changed from escapism to commodifying cannabis, and I engaged in what I called myself a medicine man at the time of supporting people in having access to their cannabis and making money from it to be able to provide for my children in my life and my status as a single father. I was able to make enough money to move to Colorado. And when I moved to Colorado, where cannabis was legal, that's when the shift for me began. I'll briefly just explain this and then get in to a lineage of cannabis and some other things before taking any questions. But the shift for me was from cannabis, my relationship with cannabis and ecology, shifting from commodifying or controlling it, a very Lockean or a very Western approach, a very patriarchal approach to our relationship. Instead of dominating it and controlling it and distributing it for unfair exchange. So I was making money off of the cannabis way beyond which was reasonable for the input that I was putting in to receiving it from the earth. When I moved to Colorado, I retired from the world of distributing cannabis, and almost immediately, but through time, my relationship shifted towards a more medicinal and a more sensitive and consensual, for lack of a better term, or maybe that's the best term, in relationship ecology with cannabis. And I grew for back east, but I began growing here for medicine, and to make medicine for my father, for his illnesses, which he'll have to share with you himself. But his illness, one of his illnesses is something that cannabis has been proven, scientifically proven through a variety of scientific studies to support combating. So, and creating what we're calling hemp oil or Phoneix tears, and just engaging with cannabis. And in that shift to seeing cannabis as a medicine, I began to start to incorporate medicine into my spirituality or my spiritual practices, which I hold two of mainly. One goes back to the ancient Egyptian or Kemetic tradition. Sorry, hold on. And another part of my heritage is Jewish, which both of those traditions, as I'll get into briefly here in a moment, have long-lasting, thousands of year relationships with this plant. So spirit, usually it's written as religion. That's enough about me. So let's just get right into it. So most religions, our spiritual paths, have what's called a lineage. You may or may not know, you probably do. And I kind of foresaw this as cannabis having a spiritual lineage in its own. I'm not going to go into too much details, but the information I share here will give you a bit of insight that you can go on and do more research with, I'm assuming. But to my knowledge, and based on the bit of research I've done, cannabis first showed up in here, let me actually put up, I'll share this one picture. Cannabis first showed up in ancient Egypt, is what most people have heard of this place, but it's ancient Kemet. And it showed up in hieroglyphics in this area. These are, this is a civilization, one of the first civilizations from thousands and thousands of years ago that evolved, or not evolved, sorry, that's the wrong word, devolved probably, but that whose ancestors came from ancient Nubia and even further south, where people, Homo sapiens sapiens, first evolved from away from the rest of the hominin species. So here's one example that actually came much later, but this is an example on papyrus, which was probably made of hemp, to be honest, utilizing all aspects of this plant. And the theory is that the cannabis leaf is actually in the head or on the headpiece, somewhere in this area of the figure. I'm not seeing it necessarily in this specific picture, but you can do research and find other pictures that show it explicitly. I'm seeing some reeds of cannabis possibly here in the satchels, and I'm seeing what I often see in quote unquote Egyptian figures, which is I'm seeing the presentation of a lotus flower, which now I guess I'll just tell you that often the lotus flower is the flower of spiritual significance, and it's often interchangeable with the cannabis, or connected, as it appears here in this figure, if you can see my mouse here, connected with the lotus itself. The lotus was then adopted, for anybody who's studied Eastern traditions, the Hindu traditions, Jainism or Buddhism, or any of the Bon tradition, which is the indigenous tradition of India. You know, their use of the lotus plant was quite plausibly inspired by their ancestors in North Africa. So that would be the first time that logically cannabis would have shown up. The first time that it's been documented in writing would have been in China. I believe it's about 2500 BC, if I'm not mistaken. And again, you know, BC is before the Common Era, so that's 4,000 years ago. 4,500 years ago instead. Actually, so let me get the accurate dates here. Okay, so 2737 BCE. So 4,737 years ago, 4,757 years ago. I apologize, I did not study math at all. But this is when people are this is when the European traditions that do most of the historical study that we have access to, this is when they were studying and finding proof of cannabis and hemp showing up in for usage, a variety of reasons, but for papyrus, for writing on, but also for medicinal use. And you'll see throughout that medicinal use seems to be the common thread, maybe even all the way until the until the Common Era. I guess we're in the postmodern era now or something. So anyhow, so then after we at 2737 BCE, the next time we see it show up is in the papyrus I showed you from Egypt, and that's called the Ebers Papyrus. And again, it's used as it's shared as an ingredient in concoctions for a variety of reasons, but one of them is to extend life. But there's also basic things like just basic inflammation, anti-depression, for pain, things that we use it for today. The extending life one, we'll have to get back to that another time. People always love to misplace the yearning for longevity solely on the Egyptians. Most species, most cultures want to sustain life on the planet if they can. So the next time that we see cannabis showing up, and I'll get through this historical aspect here soon, but is a bit later, all the way up till about the 2nd century CE. So now we're in let's say what we say 200, year 200-ish. Between the 1100 BC to the year 200, we're seeing it show up in Greece. And that makes sense because, as has been proven by Chikanta Diop and many other Afrocentric and non-Afrocentric archaeologists, knowledge evolved with people to a certain extent, or migrated, not evolved, migrated with people. And the great, universities of Alexandria and so forth, and northern in Thebes, is where people came to study from Egypt. The great people of Greece that we study in continental philosophy, the Socrates and such, they all apparently spent time studying these things and refining Pythagorean and all these other folks. Again, I didn't study math. Refining their time in Africa and then bringing it back to Greece. And naturally, they probably brought back this interest in cannabis and its connection to medicinal practices. And it was mentioned, if anybody's interested or you're very much interested in continental or Greek things, it's mentioned for its psychoactive plant properties and as a cleansing agent for spiritual practices. We also find cannabis in Hindi cultures, in traditional, the Bong traditions, which are ancient traditions of India. And as many people have talked about or attempted to commodify, there are signs that cannabis made its way to the Americas, quote unquote, maybe through interaction with the Olmecs, the African civilization that came over and interacted with the indigenous people of the Americas, or probably just through the indigenous peoples of America's knowledge before they migrated over to this area of the world. And yes, medicinal powers and purposes and sacred ceremonies. And then I'll conclude us real quick before I get into some what I think are important suggestions with the Rastas in Jamaica and throughout. And the Rastas are seen as a mixture of Christian, but it's really Hebrew, but Christian and a little bit of influence from Hindi culture in terms of their interaction with cannabis. So cannabis is not explicitly a Christian thing to engage in cannabis. There is I believe it's Genesis. There is a verse that speaks on the green fruits or seeds of the earth, and that's often used, I believe it was someone speaking to Solomon or something, but that's often used as a scripture that people believe is referring to cannabis. Yeah, it's referring to every seed bearing species on the planet, which we are a part of even, actually. And yes, cannabis is a part of that. And in that tradition, then yes, then of course, cannabis is then a gift from God, in essence, to be appropriately used and not misused. And, you know, Al-Kebulan, the indigenous name for Africa, also translates to Garden of Eden, Garden of Eden. And I assume that there was cannabis growing in the Garden of Eden. So yes, so the Rastas interact with cannabis in a very interesting way. And the true Rasta will interact with it in a very Hindi way, which is solely for ritual purposes. And then an extension of that Rasta will engage in it for a variety of other purposes. And I shouldn't have said true versus untrue, but I guess I mean true to the Hindi aspects of it. So now we'll get to things that run through all of these different ethnic approaches or interactions with cannabis and religion, which is ritual. So cannabis, interacting with it and smoking it or ingesting it is and even in growing it is a ritual. And engaging with cannabis in many of these traditions in regards to spirit or religion ought only happen when ritual is occurring. Now, ritual has evolved or translated into different traditions over time. And it's been found in, you know, ancient Hebrew, there's ancient Hebrew traditions where they find ancient, you know, cannabis oils in their temples. And there's, you know, this is stuff that it's often connected to trying to reconnect with the source or with God or with the divine. In a more Indian or Hindi tradition, you could say it's used to inspire one's bhakti or faith in this non-dual or in this connection. So I would say when intersecting cannabis and wisdom tradition practice or religious practice. And real quick, religion in itself is not a bad thing. Religion, the root of it is to blend, which is not, I wouldn't be here without the blending of different people and traditions, I'll tell you that. But blending is in itself not bad. What we've done what religion shows up as today is often very toxic and harmful. But ritual in itself it can be a very personal thing, and it can be separate from the institution of religion, and it ought to be. And that's kind of how I'm going to proceed speaking about it. So when I use the term religion, I'm speaking of it as a spiritual practice of blending oneself with engagement with their source or their practice. And in that, we avoid spiritual bypassing. You know, to go and pay a shaman, sorry if anybody here has, or if anybody who ever listens to this has done this, but to go and pay a shaman in Peru to bring you through some sort of ayahuasca experience, and then, you know, to come back to the States and go back to being the same person you are, and to not, you know, there's a sort of spiritual bypassing or commodifying that's coming, that's a materialism that's been taking place. And it's intersecting with these hallucinogenic medicines like cannabis, ayahuasca, the psilocybin in the mushrooms, you know, and things like this. So we ought to be careful. Now, does that mean that by engaging with ayahuasca or smoking cannabis for recreational purposes, there's something wrong with that? I actually don't believe there's something wrong with that at all. I just think that's a separate thing than having it be a spiritual practice. So what I will say, and I'm at a minute towards 20 minutes here, so I'll try to be more brief here. There's only a few more things I wanted to touch on, which is Buddhism. And, you know, I did study Buddhism quite heavy, but my thesis in my master's was about ancient Egypt, ancient Kemet. And I learned that very plausibly that the traditions of the Buddhist, specifically meditation, the few forms I'll talk about today, um, came from North African traditions, which I've already mentioned earlier, came from Nubian and South Eastern African traditions. So essentially the original people of the planet. And again, this was a time when, for any white people that are listening ever, you know, this was a time when there were no white or black people. We were all black, and that's okay. You know, things have changed, and we've migrated around a bit, and now we show up in a variety of different flavors and varieties, and that's okay too. But back then we were all black, and we migrated around the planet. And one of the places we migrated to is India. And then these people turned a bit more brown. And these are the traditions that we learn about out of India. And so samadhi meditation, or peaceful meditation, is a meditation that is one meditation I'll speak on briefly. And then I'll speak on Lojong and Tonglen practices briefly, and more just how they can interact with cannabis. And then, and if I even recommend you interact with them in cannabis. But first, I want to just give you a little anecdote of what Lama Tempo Getalsen, the Lama that I studied under, who is from a different culture, but this fella was dropped off at 12 at the foot of a cave, sorry, could be a cave to wait for his guru in the cold to come out and retrieve him a week later. So this is the Lama I studied under. I didn't have to sit, fortunately, outside of a cave. You know, we're in the cage of the United States, depending on your identity here. But anyway, one of the things he said about cannabis is a student said to him one day, I'm assuming it was a Westerner, came up and said, you know, hey, how do you feel if I I'd love to blaze up a little bit and relax, sit on my, these folks, this is Tibetan sitting meditation. I should clarify, this is Tibetan tradition. I'd like to sit on my mat or my cushion and do my meditation and smoke a little spliff, relax, close my eyes, relax, do my thing. Is there a problem with that? Or am I not connecting in the right way? Or is this not going to work? What's going on here? And the Lama Tempa looked at him and he goes, it's fine to meditate while smoking cannabis. But he said, I don't recommend smoking cannabis while meditating. And that's pretty much the little antidote that I go by in my own practice with meditation. It's about blending. It's about engagement. So now I'll talk about the specific practices. So samadhi meditation, essentially calming meditation for the purposes of finding presence and being in the moment. And the reason to do that, by the way, is to apparently, right, you have to have faith in this tradition, bhakti, but is to connect with the source or connect with the absolute, connect with something that's beyond the illusion of time even, but the illusion of the material world more explicitly. So you sit, right? So when you're sitting, to me, in sitting meditation, where the object of meditation is literally to sit and to let thoughts arise and fade away as they do, and you're not trying to engage with anything or manage anything, then yes, cannabis is recommended, actually. Especially for people who have anxiety and have a difficult time sitting still. Meditation itself will be helpful for that, but definitely, and especially if you have any sort of pain, okay? And we'll get to that in a second after I just, about the final piece here about Buddhism. So then there's Lojong and Tonglen, which are practices which are about loving kindness and, taking an energy of negative energies and kind of filtering it through yourself and projecting back out positive energy. And for these type of meditations, which are a bit, I don't want to say higher level because everybody can do them, but you ought to practice just like It took LeBron James. Anyway, it took him practice. Or who were you all? You're right. It took Devin Booker years of shooting that jump shot to be able to make it so smoothly. So there is something to say. Practice in these traditions is important. So it does take a certain amount of practice to engage in the process of participating in the cleansing of the energy of the world, and sending out and shifting your energy towards another being. And those practices, Lojong or Tonglin practices, no, I do not recommend cannabis while explicitly engaging in those practices. That being said, those practices ought never be done exclusively without calming meditation. So you'll always have the opportunity to do your calming meditation as well. So that's a little piece on Buddhist meditation. And then the final piece is this, in different traditions, is this blasphemous? Is this anti-virtuous? You know, is this missing the mark? All right, these are 3 different traditions, and I'll be about another 2 minutes here. Like,
No, you're good. Keep going.
Okay.
You're good.
And missing the mark is from the ancient Egyptian, Nubian tradition, actually. So to hit the mark is to be in tune, right? And to be in tune is to really be in the moment, right? And to be in connection with the source, which is everything. And so anyway, so that's that tradition. You know, to be virtuous is a Buddhist terminology, and that's to be living in virtue. You know, that's to be living in alignment with the Dharma path, which is the path of Buddha, let's say, right? And a real quick aside, because Darnell said it's not in a rush here, Buddha, the first appearance of Buddha that I've heard of, it was a lioness and a statue on the top of a stupa, which is like looks like a tombstone kind of, with like spiritual writings and different things on it. So, and it was put there by like the Sakya Empire of Japan. You have to look into the details of this specific part of it. But my point is that the Buddha was not necessarily, ironically here, the Lion of Judah or whatever, but anyway, the Buddha itself was not necessarily a Siddhartha Buddha, the story of the Buddha, right? Sitting under the Bodhi tree and waiting there and doing all this stuff to hurt himself until finally Siddhartha, I believe, came along and fed him and gave him some rice, and then he finally connects with the source, or nirvana, or he reaches, he transcends, okay? But ironically, he's still here, but that's another story for another talk. But these type of, these type of engagements, anyway, being in tune with this is what virtue is in that tradition. And then in the Christian tradition, at least in the mystical sense, it's the source. It's leaning back into God. It's seeing God in yourself. It's recognizing that the blessing of love is in the loving, and that we are an expression of the divine. So it's these are all connected to ethical paths, and these are all connected to ethical behaviors. So how does this interact with? How do ethics interact with one's personal morality, right? How does it interact with cannabis? Well, so in Buddhism, for example, you have these precepts, and these are the laws you need to avoid, right? You have, what is it, 613 commandments that the Hebrews have. You've got, 10 for the Christians, but there's a variety of different, there's 42 laws of Mayat, which are the ancient Kemetic or ancient Egyptian principles. So like you've got these principles, and in almost every one, there is something that can be read to say that you should avoid cannabis in some sort, if you see it as a toxin or as a non-medicinal use. So that kind of gets back to full circle to the beginning of this brief talk here, which is how we engage with cannabis has a lot to do with what it is and what it means, and if it is part of our spiritual path or if it's part of our recreational path, and both are fine. So what I'm really talking about is intention. What is one's intention when they engage with this plant? When they engage with growing it, when they engage in harvesting it, when they engage in curing it, do they have the patience, when they engage in sharing it, when they engage in hoarding it, when they engage in, smoking it or eating it, So, or donating it to your shrine or to the mountain or to whatever it is, to the desert, where you all have little mountains, little hills out there too, to the hills and such. So it's what you're doing with your cannabis. So I guess I'll close out on the Buddhist precept, avoid toxins. If your intention is to engage with cannabis in a non-toxic way, then you are avoiding toxins. Only you know if you are engaging with something in a non-toxic way. And no one else, it's no one else's place to judge that. And that's, I believe, the crux of cannabis and spirit is one's intention. And yeah, I believe that's a poignant conclusion. If there are any questions about anything, cannabis, metaphysics, or anything else I've said, I'm welcome to take that. If not, then I'll see you in person, hopefully next time I'm down in Phoenix.
John got a question for you, Ant.
All right, perfect. No, come a little closer to the microphone or whatever it is there.
If you want to say your question, I can
Yeah,
repeat
Darnell
it.
can speak. Yeah, Darnell. Yeah.
Wait, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I had a question about some of the history that you're finding. You showed that the earliest you were able to find it was back in Egypt or Kemet. I see a lot of people speaking that it's India tradition with the bond, the drinking it. And I was just curious on your findings for that. Like, is that something you have seen as well? Or is that you're like, no, I know my proof is Egypt? Or is it is it a theory compared to a fact?
So he's basically, did you hear that, Ant?
You can give a synopsis real quick. It'll give me more time to think you.
Okay, gotcha. So basically, he was saying that you're saying that cannabis, the first findings were in ancient Kemet or Egypt, and it sounds like certain people are disputing that it may be India, even in terms of smoking and drinking cannabis. So John wanted to know more specifically where you're finding like that source to say Egypt versus India. Is that okay?
So quick thing. So a couple things. I'll start with just basic with that explicitly answering your question. So the concept, the theory is that, and it's a pretty sound one, that knowledge migrates as humans migrate, as the person migrates, right? And philosophy migrates as the people migrate. So the Levintian coriander is the actual scientific area or region, the geographical region that you want to study, that shows about the dispersal of humans and human knowledge out of North Africa. And that's where we begin to go back when you look at things from a more Afrocentric lens, and we begin to say, well, the spreading of knowledge was from North Africa, and one area that it spread to was what we call modern day India. Now, the Bon tradition, which I don't know if I heard you mention that or not, but that tradition and the Nagas tradition, I believe, of India, and the tradition even that Siddhartha, the ethnic group that even Siddhartha was actually, his ethnicity was that, even though he was a Brahmin, even though his status was wealthy, I believe his mother's ethnicity or something was of this ancient, darker, more African tribe. And it even connects to the tribe in India today that's the most oppressed, by the way. The Dilets caste. So, and excuse me if I'm saying these terms wrong, but they're all verifiable. So this is where the concepts come, where people draw the connections of, okay, humans migrate, knowledge migrates, and with that, naturally then the knowledge of interaction with cannabis migrates out of there. So in terms of cannabis and its connection to the lotus plant, that needs, you know, the studying there goes back to the oldest religious text on the planet, which is from the Pyramid of Unis. And that's from the Great Pyramid region of Africa. And it's UNAS. And it's from his temple, like the Pyramid Temple. And in there, we have the oldest religious, once they deciphered and took it all down from the hieroglyphics, Meduneder, language of the gods is how it translates. Once they took that down, they were able to decipher because of the Rosetta Stone. Again, I'm throwing out a bunch of buzzwords that you can use down the line. But because of their work with this, they were able to put out this first religious text. And in there's a lot of pictures and that accompany these concepts. And as I was saying earlier, the cannabis and the lotus are found there as representations of plants that you interact with, even the opiate plant as well. So much more research needs to be done in this department. Unfortunately, my doctorate is going to be in a different direction because there's not even enough interest to sponsor people to do this, unfortunately, right now, but more research needs to be done. So now I'll get back to, does this even matter? Which is even more important to me than what I just said, trying to explain to you that this came from Africa. Great, everything came from Africa. Does that matter is really the question, right? In my opinion, after studying history and religion, which is pretty much the history of philosophy, no, I don't believe it matters. I think what I view things, you know, what you thought of this morning on the toilet may be just as valid as what Socrates stole from Thebes. You know, anyway, sorry, that I shouldn't, but you know, but is just as valid as something that, what the ancient Menes of, you know, the pharaoh of ancient Kemet would have written down in one of his texts. You know, I don't know, like it's you know, or what's written on the walls of his pyramid of his tomb, like. It's a very it becomes iffy to me when we start putting hierarchies in there, and the only reason that and grasping an ego, and the only reason I can see to try to prove that something came from somewhere and not something else when we're all part of the same species is because of ego and grasping and hierarchy and domination and control and secrecy. And in my opinion, no one owns any of this stuff. Like I said, if you're going to shoot like Devin Booker, you better get in the gym. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's not a game. Like, if you're going to really be on your jump, and if you really believe in passing through the goddess Newt in the sky and being resurrected and meeting your maker and having to hold up to the 42 laws of Maya, or being regurgitated by the beast and coming back to live your life again, something that may have been adopted by the Indian people from the African traditions. But like, if you really believe in that, then you better be on your mark. You better not miss your mark in your life, and you better follow the laws, right? So like, it's you know, it's, to me, that's what it's about. It's not about who can do it and who can't. It's about doing it. We all ought to have access to this stuff. We ought to respect where it came from as far back as we can go, but we shouldn't grasp to the origin. In my opinion, grasping to the origin can cause much suffering, to stay in the Buddhist terminology. And it's inaccurate. It's inaccurate to assume that we know that we need to know where any of this stuff came from, and it's inaccurate to assume we do, and it's inaccurate to assume that this stuff came from anywhere but the source. And even the source, ready for this here? Even the source is within a duality of source and not source. So before the concept of a source or a birth or a beginning or a God, the true God that there's this concept beyond time, obviously, in the primordial. Because to be before time, there must be a concept of time to be before. So anyway, but right now, in this moment, the hierarchy ought to not be a part of any of this. And where this stuff came from, I mean, mostly is there to stroke the ego and for people to help to separate people from it. And that's not what this is about. Religion is about blending, not about separating. But thank you for your question. Yeah.
Okay, did you guys, anybody else have any other questions? Anything else? Saki, did you have a question? Anybody? Okay. Well, and I don't know where folks can find you if they want to reach out, or if you have any contacts. You can send that to me and I can share it on social media, or you can send it to me and I can forward it to John and he can disperse it. If people want to contact you, or if people want to or have more questions about any of this information, if there's any way to reach you, you know, because I don't know if you're on social media, but I know you have certain like contacts out there, like a LinkedIn or something, you know.
Yeah, so I'll send you my LinkedIn and then email as well. And then I'm always down to chat with folks. I'm always down to talk or speak. And
Yeah, come on. Yeah, I'm sorry. And somebody else did have a question. If you want to come, you can come closer. Yeah, come on.
Hey, how's it going?
You can come here. Yeah,
doing well. Yeah. Hey, how's it
See you,
going?
man.
Yeah, good to see
A lot
you.
of stuff, man. That was some awesome information. But I
Thank-
might have a silly question. The origins of, well, I got two-layer question. The healthiest way to smoke,
Okay.
and the healthiest blunts versus papers, and how I'm on this health kick. How can I stay on the health kick, still smoking, smoking every day?
Okay, so well, as you know, I mean, moderation.
I'm gonna tell you now. I do the White Owls and sometimes the game.
Okay,
Blunt.
so let me get right to it then. So the high in terms of blunt wraps, there's this thing called High Hemp, which is a brand out of Canada, and you can get it online, maybe even at your local spot. And it's not the same, I understand, because the connection of nicotine and cannabis is its own thing. And there's spiritual purposes in connection with tobacco, but not that stuff we be not there ain't nothing spiritual in that blunt wrap. But but that
we got some of the high hemp.
Yes, sir. Oh yeah.
yeah, so okay, good. So I would probably start with that. That's not going to be like a backwood though, because that backwood's real, right? And gives you a whole different thing. Now the hemp plant, like, there's ways if once people get to growing and stuff. Like I've literally rolled up a joint with a ganja leaf before, and that's down the line, and that takes some time, and you got to use honey and stuff. But those blunt wraps is what I do right away. And then just papers, but the blunt wrap right away. Now to answer your other question real quick, of course, moderation is the biggest thing with everything, with chocolate, with love making, with smoking, with everything, right? With how often I wear my hat, right? I got to let the hair breathe. So the healthiest way though to smoke, because we're going to still engage with it, and there still haven't been a series of studies that have shown for some weird reason that cannabis has the same effect as tobacco. It just doesn't on your lungs. So the healthiest way to smoke is reasonably, and I would say water, something that the water pipe is probably the best way to go about it if you're going to just smoke, like a bong. And then vaping, vaping flower. There is one brand, Lynx, Linx, I believe, Lynx brand. It is an expensive, like $120 investment, but there is like you take your bud, you break it up in there. It's different, for someone who's been smoking forever, it's not the same. But that's a way to supplement it. And what I recommend is eventually investing in a vape pen like that, a whole plant vape, whole flower vape, and then supplementing it and saying, all right, I'm going to smoke my cannabis bowl, right? And then I'm going to smoke, I don't even have my vape near me, but then I'm going to smoke my vape every other time, right? So this time it'll be the bowl, this time it'll be the vape, this time it'll be a blunt, and then just keep that cycle so that you're not always with the damn blunt. Because even those high hemps, I still don't try, that's just the least of two evils right there. And Arizona knows all about the least of two evils. Y'all be voting for the least of two evils. So y'all know all about that.
That proper balance. Got it. And I'm hip to those rappers. Yeah, so get those. Yeah, I'm gonna go buy those. So get rid of the cigarettes.
Yeah, the connection to tobacco makes it addictive, actually, more so than just grasping. It makes it like a actual physiological addiction, and it messes with your epigenetics. Like it actually can morph your genetics.
Really?
Well, not your morphing of genetics is epigenetics, but anyway, it's you don't want to. Tobacco's an interesting thing. Um, now, real quick though, before you go, I would not say just cease doing anything if it's having a therapeutic benefit though in the moment, right? So like to me, like even when I quit smoking tobacco, I quit smoking cigarettes, like I slowly cut down and then I went and had to cut it off. Like there's a way to like make sure if you're getting a psychological benefit that is equal to the health benefit, like psychological benefit health is valid, and we should start acknowledging it as important. And if you need to smoke a blunt someday so that you don't lose it, or so you don't do something much more harmful than smoking that blunt, then please smoke that blunt. And think of me when you're doing that shit, and then go buy the hemp blunt next. All right. There you go. All right, one minute.
Love it, man. Thanks for the knowledge, man. You was dropping some serious gems, man.
I know dollars one, man. No doubt.
Over and out. I appreciate it, man.
Thank you, sir. But yeah, man, I'm gonna if you whatever you send in, I'm gonna send it to Jonathan, and we can just share it on social media. I don't know if anyone is in contact, but it seems like they may, be questions. I'm not sure, but we can play it by air. All I know, thank you again for taking the time. I hope the kids are well. Um, and yeah, man, we'll talk more outside of this event.
All right. All right, man. I'll talk to you soon. Love you, brother.
Love you too, man. Be well.
All right. See you. Thank you, everybody.
Peace. Peace.